So I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, the ponies are there so I can go out and pose. I won't have a Fair Isle sweater to wear, but I can stand there in my raincoat and hang out with the ponies. Hi, my name's Mark, and this is Gus, and today we're going to talk all about Fair Isle knitting. If you have no clue what I'm talking about and you're just here for the cat, stick around. If you're familiar, we're going to talk all about the history of Fair Isle knitting, pattern options. We're going to look at color card samples, and hopefully you can help me come to a decision about what sweaters I should make and what yarn I should purchase on my upcoming trip to Scotland and the Shetland Islands. Let's get into it. So Gus is leading the way with a sweater in front of me that is not a Fair Isle, but it gets the gist of it. So I'm just going to show this off for a second. This design is called Enniskillen, and it comes from Courtney Kelly. She designs for Kelbourne Woolens, and I used Cricket from Kelbourne Woolens for this sweater vest. And I just wanted to show it off for a second. The technique used here is stranded color work. You can see the different colors used in the design, and if I flip it over, you'll see my strands, my stranding of different colors across the back. So stranded knitting is a more general technique. It's any sort of knitting where you're using multiple colors, stranding them, carrying them across the back side of the work. You could use as few as 2 colors, you could use as many colors as you want, and you could use as many in one row as you would like. The patterns are also really varied. There's all sorts of stuff out there. Sweaters that look like dinosaurs, sweaters that have a giant octopus wrapping around the whole thing, and then more traditional patterns, kind of like the one in front of us. So looking at Fair Isle knitting and the differences, this smaller band here, and even the larger band, both make me think of Fair Isle knitting patterns. So a couple differences just at the start. For Fair Isle knitting, you'll never use more than 2 colors in one row. Your garment, your finished project, could have as many colors as you'd like, but you're only using 2 at a time as you work across the work, or really around the work. Historically, Fair Isle knitting was always done in the round. Current patterns, modern patterns, will often have you work flat, where you're working a right side, turning and doing your stranded work on the reverse side. Another feature that's common to Fair Isle knitting is that the pattern, the changes of colors, will happen almost constantly. You won't have large breaks in the pattern like I have on this sweater vest, and you also won't have long stretches where you're not using one of your 2 colors. Typically you'll use each color for 2 stitches, 3 stitches, maybe 1 stitch at a time. So they're always taking turns, and therefore they're really balanced in their tension. You're not having to worry about catching a long float or checking the tension in quite the same way as you would for general stranded color work. So that's a little bit to get our feet wet. We are going to look at a bit of the history of Fair Isle knitting. We have a great resource here from Alice Starmore. It's the Book of Fair Isle Knitting. So I'm going to take you through a little overview of what she covers there, and then we're going to look at some patterns that I'm considering for a couple of projects I'll do for myself and for my husband. And then we've got color cards. These color cards come from Jamieson's of Shetland, and they're on loan to me from one of my friends and knitting mentors, Peg. I've talked about her on the channel before. So we'll be able to look at these up close, and hopefully from the color cards, from the patterns I show you, and some of the information I discuss here, you'll be able to help me make a really educated decision on what I should make, what I should invest my time and money in for these upcoming projects. So I mentioned that Fair Isle knitting and a lot of stranded knitting are both done in the round. If you're making socks, mittens, gloves, a hat, a sweater, you can do that by connecting your work and working all the way around a pair of circular needles, or you could use double pointed needles depending on the size of your project and how many stitches you have. So what that means for creating something with armholes or a V-neck or a rounded shaped neck opening, you are knitting essentially one big tube. You're working all the way around, creating a cylinder, carrying your colors as you go. You're never dropping them off. They're always being used in a row or carried up until you need them for the next part of that pattern. And then when you get to the point of needing armholes or a neck opening, you'll create what's called a steek. And I've talked about steeking in a couple of my other videos because I really love to knit in the round. So for this sweater, I'll show you while I have it in front of me. When I reached the armhole openings, I needed to create a steek. So I was instructed by the pattern to bind off some of my stitches. And then on the next round, cast on something like 5 or 7 stitches. Typically in a steek, you'll use an odd number of stitches so that you can have one center channel and then a grouping of stitches on each side. So if you have 5 stitches in a steek, you have your center channel where you will eventually cut, and then 2 stitches on each side. So I created a steek, and then that was just kind of like empty space. I could choose how I wanted to use the colors in the steek because later it will be cut and folded behind the work. But it allows us to carry all of the colors we're using directly across what will later become that armhole opening or that neck opening, which means you're not working flat. You don't have to stop, turn your work, and go the wrong way. You're still working on the right side and still carrying all of your colors with you. So this is an example of that. You can see on the reverse side, the inside, the small sort of flap of fabric that I folded back. You can see the cut strands, which with time will felt even more. Right now they're pretty inconspicuous. They just fold back and you won't see it from the front because of the little bit of ribbing I have there at the armhole opening. So if you want to know more about steeking, I have some other videos where I talk about adapting patterns to work in the round, and I show that reinforcing process and then cutting the work open. I think it's like knitting magic. A lot of people are scared to do it because you are cutting your work open, which seems crazy. But depending on what fiber you've used and what method you've used to reinforce, your work is safe. You're not going to ruin it. Just take your time. And if you have help from somebody who's done it before, let them help you just to make sure that you can do it successfully for the first time. So in front of me, I have Alice Starmore's Book of Fair Isle Knitting. And I'm not going to crack open the book and show it all on camera because these things are copyrighted, protected. But if you're interested in the book, it is available through Amazon and other online retailers for, I think, an affordable price. It's a decently thick book, so you get a lot of information. I'll show you the back cover. And it's nice. It does include patterns, and the patterns are, in my opinion, maybe a little outdated, but we're talking about Fair Isle. It's historic, and so it's, I guess, never really outdated. If you're making a Fair Isle sweater, you are adhering to some of these historical shapes and patterns and color combinations to create this fabric that is now iconic and known around the world from its inception in Fair Isle. So I don't know if I already said, Fair Isle is the most southern island belonging to the Shetland Islands. So part of Scotland, north of the mainland, just little dots in the sea. And if you're taking the ferry from Scotland and you're getting closer and closer to Shetland, the first island you would reach is Fair Isle. And it's a very small island. It has people that live there, sheep that live there, and that's where this tradition started. And initially, according to what I've learned from this book, it was not popular. The style of all of the motifs, the arrangement of the 2 colors and the general designs used in the sweaters, they just weren't popular. They didn't catch on and spread to the rest of Shetland or the rest of Scotland. It wasn't until the Prince of Wales in the 1920s was photographed wearing a Fair Isle sweater or sweater vest. I'll pop the picture up here on the screen, that this became really popular and mainstream. After that, you had Fair Isle replicated through machine knits and a lot of people knitting them by hand at home. So I talked a bit about what makes Fair Isle different from stranded knitting, and that is the hard rule that you're not using more than 2 colors in one row. If you are a stranded knitter and you've made some of the more complicated, modern, realistic looking stranded knits that exist out there, you might have found yourself tangled up with 3 colors per row, 4 colors, maybe even 5 colors per row. It seems crazy, and it is so much more complicated than working with 2 colors in one row. If you're doing 2 colors, if you're an English style knitter, a continental knitter, or a combination knitter, there are pretty simple adaptations you can make to your normal knitting style where you can easily throw or pick both strands without too much tangling and without too much fuss. If you have 3 colors or 4 colors in that one row, it's so much more complicated, and some people thrive, some people are great at it, and they can easily make these really beautiful complex sweaters, but for most people it becomes sort of a hurdle or a headache to do projects like that all the time. So in Fair Isle knitting, you just have the 2 colors per row, which makes these very complex, detailed sweaters and projects somewhat simple. The other thing is that you're always working a knit stitch. So if you don't like to purl that much, if you don't like to cable, if you don't like having a lot of textured patterns to keep up with, this could be a great break from that. So you're just knitting across every row, every round, and working your garment until it's time for a steek or a little bit of decreasing or binding off. Another note about color in these sweaters is that initially when the technique was used, there weren't as many color options. We didn't have synthetic artificial dyes that were used like we have today, where you'll end up with hundreds of color options, hundreds of shades of red to choose from. So a lot of these sweaters were initially made using a color palette of 5 to 6 shades that could be done naturally and consistently with the dyeing methods of the time. Fast forward to the 20th century when we're getting a lot of artificial dyes and the color palette of wool and yarn is expanding, and these sweaters also expanded in the palette, the options you have. So a Fair Isle sweater could use anywhere from 5 or 6 colors to 10, 12, 20 if you want to go crazy. A lot of options I see range from about 6 to maybe 12, maybe 14 colors. And then it gets busy. So part of what happens in these Fair Isle sweaters is that you have recurring themes. You have common motifs that are rooted in the history of this technique. So one of the most common patterns is an OXO pattern. So using the letters of the alphabet, one of the ideas in stranded knitting is your lines of symmetry and how your lines of symmetry affect the overall pattern when you stand back and look at whatever it is you've knitted, whatever your fabric is. So having an O and an X, you have 4 common lines of symmetry between the 2 letters, and the O gives you an infinite number of lines of symmetry. So you can do a lot with how those characters interact with the rest of your stitches, the rest of your geometric shapes that you might come up with for a Fair Isle sweater. Another interesting point about the shapes used is that a lot of the shapes initially came from common household items, common shapes you would see in architecture, in nature. So you have the heads of milk churn plungers, whether that's a cross or something that looks more like a steering wheel, crosses that are double stacked, kind of like a hashtag, things like that. And then from nature, you have flowers, you have stars, you have other geometric shapes. And if you look at some of the examples that I'm scrolling through on the screen, you'll see a lot of the same shapes recurring throughout different designs, different designers, modern day examples, and different designs that exist from the last 200 years. Now that we've talked a little bit about what makes Fair Isle patterns Fair Isle, what sets them apart from other colorwork or other knitting patterns, let's look at the different types of patterning, the different geometric shapes and charts used in Fair Isle. The smallest patterns used in Fair Isle are called Peerie patterns. And Peerie is a Scottish word that means small. So our Peerie patterns are existing across maybe just one row or up to about 7 rows. Border patterns, which are typically used as a border before or after a larger pattern that exists in your design, can consist of 9 to 15 rows. Many border patterns utilize the OXO variation, and these can either be symmetrical or asymmetrical. The next two categories of stitch pattern are seeding and waves and peaks. Seeding makes me think of like a seed stitch or a moss stitch, and it's used in between. It's filler. It's, a small diagonal shape or a small kite shape that's spread out, repeating, sort of like polka dots. It's filler. And then waves and peaks are used to help you transition between one color and the next, or going from a light shade to a dark, mostly so you can help set up a larger bit of Fair Isle knitting to help the colors stand out in the right way. So if you need one color to be the background and the other to be at the foreground, you could use waves and peaks to help transition and shift from light to dark. I already mentioned things from nature, things like stars, flowers, so one big category of Fair Isle patterns and charts come from Norwegian stars. And our last general category of stitch design here is an all-over pattern. And this could be something that takes up much more of the garment. So it could be like argyle or zigzags, something that you can't quite achieve in 5 rows or even 20 rows. You might need 60 rows of a chart to achieve the argyle, the zigzag, whatever pattern you are using here. So if you're interested in learning more about Fair Isle or playing around with creating your own patterns, this book is a great resource. There are pages and pages, dozens of pages with examples of charts that are pulled from historical examples of Fair Isle. So everything from single row Peerie patterns to larger all-over patterns. So in a way, it's like having a recipe book. You can take a border pattern, smaller Peerie patterns, pick one of the all-over patterns you like, and then fill in the gaps with seed pattern, waves and peaks, etc. So it's fun to be able to put that together. You could also sit and sketch out some of your own ideas. And the nice thing is that Fair Isle or Fair Isle inspired garments today don't have to fit a certain mold, but depending on what you imagine and how authentic you want it to feel and look, this is a great resource to put some of those things together. So I've mentioned multiple times that the big rule, the big thing separating Fair Isle from stranded knitting, and you can probably say it with me at this point, is that we're never using more than 2 colors in one row. And that might seem like we're not making something that's that colorful, but really the rule is just that. No more than 2 colors in one row. The next row could have 2 completely different colors. So if you look at these examples that I have on the screen, you'll see a huge array of really bright, really colorful, sort of wacky combinations, and then things that look much more conservative and traditional. But a lot of the color combinations from historical Fair Isle examples come from nature. They come from sunsets, from flower beds, from a town street, and the architecture, just the colors that you see, everything from building materials to the sky and the earth. So that's fun. It's a vital part of Fair Isle that you have several colors in the mix and you get to decide how they work together. So that's why we're here today. That's why I'm bringing all of this up. I'm headed to Scotland in about a week's time, and I'll be in Shetland. I'll take a trip to the Shetland Islands. I'm not going to go to Fair Isle. It's a little bit tricky to get there. You take the ferry from the main group of islands in Shetland, and depending on weather, depending on how much time you have, it doesn't always work out. So I'm only in Shetland for about 4 days. I'm in Scotland and England for a couple of weeks, a few weeks total, several weeks. That's not right.
8.
How many?
8.
So I've got Megan here with me, and Megan keeps reminding me that I'm going to be there for 8 weeks. You said how many days is it?
54.
I'm there for 54 days. So I'm there for more than a couple of weeks, but I'm only in Shetland for a short week, part of one of those weeks. So I'm excited to visit some of the wool mills, visit some of the shops, hopefully be able to sit and meet with some of the people who knit locally and have been raised in this tradition and will know so much about it. I'm just excited to spend time physically in that part of the world to hopefully soak in a lot of this art and this culture. So we're here together to help narrow down my pattern choices and then to put together some palettes of colors so that when I'm there in person, I can take my selections, arrange them in person, and see what combinations I think will work best and what I want to commit to for these projects. It makes a lot of sense for me to buy the yarn there. It's a lot cheaper to do if I am already in Scotland and in Shetland, but it's a lot to commit to. I think we have over 220 color options. So before we get to the 220 colors, let's look at some of the patterns that I've narrowed it down to. All right, we're here on Ravelry. If you're not familiar with Ravelry, it's a really great pattern resource and database. It's free to use. You can access it from a browser or from a phone, tablet, whatever. So I've got videos on Ravelry.com. If you're unfamiliar and you want to learn how to navigate it, you can check that out. It's linked below. If you're familiar, let's jump in. So I'm here in my favorites, and if you're not familiar with this, you can save your favorites into bundles. You can make specific categories of things to help sift through your favorites more rapidly. You can keep things gathered so that you can pick up where you left off, because there's a lot there. There are, over 1 million patterns on Ravelry. That's crazy. So anyway, I'm in my Stranded and Fair Isle bundle, and I have saved, I think, something like 35 patterns to this bundle. Not all of them are Fair Isle. Some of them are Stranded, but they're things that I liked, that caught my eye. And so when I find something I like on Ravelry, my rule of thumb is that I save it. I save it to my favorites. Even if I go through later and remove it, it can be very hard to find things again because there are so many patterns. The other thing you can do is you can view your search and browsing history through Ravelry. You can get to a page that shows you all of the most recent things you have clicked on. But again, it's a little complicated if you have lost track of something. So if you like it at all and you're tempted to pursue it in the future, save it to your favorites. You can get rid of it later. So here we are in my Stranded and Fair Isle bundle. I have several Marie Wallin patterns here. If you're not familiar, Marie Wallin is a designer who lives in the UK. She has a huge, I always want to say oeuvre. She has a huge repertoire of Fair Isle patterns. And so she is going to be my guide, my trusted guide for this experience of making my first true Fair Isle sweater. So I've narrowed down my search to include several of her patterns, and then I have some other options here. So I'm just going to start clicking through, and then I'll take you to my other bundle where I've narrowed things down even more. But if you see something here that you love, I want to make sure to share it with you. And if you see something that you think should get my vote and that I should reconsider, let me know in the comments, and it might make it back up there to the top of the list. So one of the first things catching my eye is this Winter Garden pullover. So Megan and I both love this pattern.
Okay? Very much, yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. This is by Marianne Stevens. It's DK weight.
So pretty.
Really, really pretty. One of my favorite things about it is the neck.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way the pattern rounds out a bit at the neck. If you've been here with me before, you know that I really like a rounded yoke pattern because I think it's flattering to my shape and my figure. So I think I love a detail like that. So this is great. Because this only uses 2 colors, it's not really hitting the criteria of what I want for my my takeaway, my memory, my souvenir project. I want to do something that uses, you know,
you can take
at least 8
advantage
colors
of the
or so.
colors, yeah.
Because I'm going to Jameson's of Shetland, where we have over 200 color options. So that's part of what I'm looking for. But in the future, I think I really want to make this sweater.
That's a good option, yeah.
This one is another that Megan and I both like a lot. This is beautiful. This is DK weight as well. Numi for adults. It's fun. It feels very modern.
I love all the transition of color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's nice.
So this is nice. This is something that I could see myself doing in the next year or two, especially if I have some leftovers, where you can see up top you don't need a lot of yardage there. Yeah. The background color and then this larger flower honeycomb situation, that's where you're going to need multiple skeins. But up here, I don't know how much you need, 50 grams, probably a half skein at most. So one thing I'm excited about for the trip and the souvenir yarn I get is that I know I'll have leftovers. So if I only have a tiny bit, I might end up making things like mittens, bookmarks. People do Fair Isle bookmarks, which I think is really cool. And then I don't know if they reinforce them or starch them, but
yeah,
it's a good way to use up a tiny bit of yarn.
That's a nice gift.
Yeah, and it's not so time consuming.
Right.
to do something flat. So this is fingering weight. And if I look here, it's made with Jameson's of Shetland. That's the yarn I'm going to use. That's where I'm going. And we can see an example of some of the things we've talked about with Fair Isle patterns. You can see flowers, sort of a larger all-over pattern. You see a smaller filler, something like a seed or a piri. I will say the patterns that attract me most, that catch my eye the most, are the ones with a lot of variety. In this example, this is beautiful. And this isn't to say that I don't like the pattern. The repetition is really regular. The size of the repeats are very regular. So you have the larger band, the smaller band. The next band is a little smaller than the first all-over pattern, but it's similar. I am a large man. I'm a tall man, so my sweater is going to be a big sweater. And so I think about that sometimes when I'm looking at patterns. If you are very petite or you have a short torso, and so the proportions of your garment you're making are smaller or petite in some way, the pacing of a pattern, the size of a pattern, the proportion of it will look quite different than somebody who is going to make the 3x or 4x version of the same pattern. Sometimes I will go up a yarn weight so that my pattern is larger, so that I don't look like I'm wearing 500 flower or star motifs. I'm wearing 300.
So like you'd scale it.
I'd scale it, exactly. And I know that's something people talk about in commercial clothing, that if you take a dress or a top that looks great in a size medium, but then you need to make it a 2x, 3x, 4x, but you're not adjusting the proportions evenly to match that body size or body shape, and then you end up with a neck opening that's the biggest thing in the world. It's like, no, my neck is only a little larger than someone who might wear a much smaller size garment than me. So I look at those things in the pacing and proportion.
Yeah, that's smart. I don't think you want it to look so busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Some people who watch these videos have sent me links to this sweater, which is a very traditional sweater. And so I have it saved. And I'll probably do it in the future. Again, it's something I could do with some leftovers, because in this situation, it is a top-down yoke sweater or a bottom-up yoke sweater, where one color is used for 3/4 of the sweater.
It has a Scandinavian feel to it.
So Megan and I looked at some patterns, and I don't know how many we looked through, at least 100 or 200. And that's what we said initially about these patterns. They're beautiful, but I am looking for something that fits the bill of Fair Isle in a stronger way. This is a beautiful, very
Mm-hmm.
famous pattern from Kate Davies, the OA. I want to make something like this
So
eventually.
nice.
But it's
Love
one of
that
those
hood.
I would really have to consider because the pattern repeats so much.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I would like it in my scale. I need to look at project examples to find people with a similar figure to me to see what it looks like and what
Mm-hmm.
colors they used, what yarn they used, and that would all affect it. You were going to say, sorry.
I really like that hood. I like that detail.
Yeah, the hood is really cool. Here's the picture with it in use.
That's very nice.
Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other things I have here, here's the Kerr sweater that I am making. This is a Rebecca Clow pattern. She lives in Edinburgh, and I swatched in my most recent video, or 2 videos ago, using some alpaca. It did not work out, but then I decided I'll use wool stock. I'll do this out of a worsted weight yarn, again, going up a weight, so the scale of it, I think, will be one step more flattering for me. So this is a sweater I'm going to make. It's not an example, a true example of Fair Isle, but it's similar. It has a lot of the properties. In the pattern, there are only a couple rows where you need to use one color for an extended period and have a long float across the back, and it's just 2 colors. So it's reminiscent of the idea, but this is a stranded knitting pattern. And the idea came from Scotland. The designer lives in Scotland, so I think it's appropriate as a souvenir project, but I'm taking the yarn with me. Let's look at one that I don't think is in my finals. So this, again, Jameson's of Shetland. Jameson's is one of 2 large yarn manufacturers in the Shetland Islands, and the wool comes from Shetland sheep. It's milled on the island. Jameson's of Shetland is still a family-run business, and so that's where I'm going to go. Hopefully I'll get to go to the mill and go to the shop. That's my goal, to get to both and look at all these colors in person. But we need to narrow it down, and I definitely need to narrow down what pattern I'll be doing. This is so dark, the colors used, that you can't see a ton of it. The other examples we'll look at are a little brighter. But you see smaller bands, and how there are just 2 colors used at a time, sort of the purple and blue here, but then they're part of a larger color scheme. So this is just an example of how colorful a sweater can be while only using 2 colors at a time. Megan has asked me if I will try to recreate some of these pictures.
That photo.
And Ned and I are staying in an Airbnb in Shetland, and I think our Airbnb is literally within a miniature pony pasture.
It's perfect.
So I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, the ponies are there so I can go out and pose. I won't have a Fair Isle sweater to wear, but I can stand there in my raincoat and hang out with the ponies. Okay, so just from scrolling through, you might see other things that catch your eye. There's a lot out there. From Marie Wallen alone, there are dozens and dozens of pattern options that fit the bill of Fair Isle. So I've narrowed things down from here, and I started saving them to another folder just to keep things organized. So now let's take a look at this narrowed down folder, which I've titled Shetland. These are all Marie Wallen patterns, so let's just look at all of them. I don't know how to pronounce any of these. Musa, Mousa. Gus would love the mouse. I really like the collar, sort of the cowl. I like that it's drop shoulder sweater vest. And I like the pacing of the patterns. Oh, not what I wanted.
And it's all clear.
It's all clear. A lot of clarity. But the split hem, the cowl neck, it's not super functional for me. I mean, ideally, having one Fair Isle sweater, one souvenir sweater, I do want something with a more traditional shape. Oh, you are just everywhere. You're so sweet. This next example, Lerwick, I really like, and Ned really liked when we were looking through these. However, this was part of a sort of limited engagement. This is not a pattern that is accessible. Just like, I have to look at the name, just like Alice Starmore's book that I was referencing earlier, a lot of Alice Starmore designs and a lot of Marie Wallen designs are exclusive to print. They're not patterns that you can just buy through Ravelry or find a downloadable version of.
Right.
Some of them are, but a lot of the collection of patterns that they've created are exclusive to books. And I get that. It's a good way to protect your work. And it's nice because then it's part of a collection. It's a little more cohesive if you designed it for a specific reason and for a specific group, line, whatever, then it stays as part of that. So I thought this was really cool. I love the pattern. It's pretty busy, but the front of it is so interesting. The way it sort of folds on itself. I can't zoom. Anyway, so I just wanted to show that, even though I won't make it. Next up is Campion. Similar in its shape, but not necessarily my favorite all over designs.
Right.
I've got a little footage of Gus that I'm putting in because he is just too stinking cute. Are you so good? I meant to say earlier when I was holding Gus for the introduction of the video that when I was with my friend Liz at the yarn shop this week, she was telling me about how she watches my videos, and she said that she watches them 3 or 4 at a time. And I said, oh my gosh, that's crazy to want to spend that much time with me in one sitting. But she's not a cat person. So she said something, a joke like, but then you bring the cats up and it's a little like, And I said, well, Liz, people request the cats. And a lot of you do. You say, not enough cats or not enough knitting.
Sweet.
So this is a very beautiful performance from Gus. He's just the best boy. And we're going to miss him so much on the trip. Some people have asked, what will happen with the cats? What will we do? We have 2 of the best house sitters, cat sitters, and friends that live just about a mile away from us. And they'll be here. They won't stay at the house the whole time, but they'll come over and spend good quality time with the animals. Okay, so back to this sweater. Similar in shape to the last, to the vest we looked at. This has long sleeves, but not my favorite all-over patterns.
Right.
And I can't be swayed by just looking at the colors of a pattern because we can decide the colors. The colors can change it completely. So I really am trying to zoom in and look at the actual motifs, the flowers, the stars, whatever are used to see if that's what I like. Next up, Troutbeck. This is also a challenging thing to look at because here we have a male model. And so part of it in my brain makes me think, oh, this one looks good because it's already on slightly broader model. But whatever size I would make would be broad and would fit me. So I think this is a beautiful pattern. Again, fingering weight. I do like this example of a very neutral background with so many colors on top of it. And I think I initially said to you that I really like the amount of crosses or stars. I don't know what's going on with the zoom feature. I like that there are so many crosses. And then we have the XO variation up here. Yep. I think it's a nice pattern.
I think it is nice to show it in those colors because it very clearly shows the patterns of those and how they work together.
Okay, we have 2 left. This next example is a vest, also out of fingering weight. And this right now is at the tip top. I really, really love this pattern, mostly for the variety. Again, this zoom feature, there we go. It's giving me trouble. I love the variety here. I mean, the first pattern going bottom up is a large pattern, followed by some very small Peries and an XO, and then a sort of medium band, very small Peary, and then a pretty large all over pattern. And that's my favorite part of it, I think. That or the next one. I just like the variety. I really like how it breaks it up.
I think this is my favorite of all of the ones we've looked at.
Yeah. I think after having looked at the book of all of the traditional patterns you can use, and even talking about it with you today, you see so many of them. You see the geometric shapes, you see the points of symmetry, and in this, I think they do so much for the line of the sweater vest. My eye isn't sitting in one place. My eye is scanning the whole thing, and it's delightful. It's exciting to think, oh, that's a really pretty pattern, and oh, that one's nice, and it's a little different, but it doesn't seem wacky.
It's not broken up. It all goes together really nicely.
It's cohesive.
Yeah.
This color combination is not my sort of color combination, which also means I like the pattern because I'm not drawn to it for the specific colors used here. I think they look nice, but they're not my palette. Okay. And our last pattern, Bessie Boot. Fingering weight as well. Got little paws on the keyboard here. You can see him. Oh, he's so cute. Here we go, Bessie Boot. I think this is beautiful. I think it looks really classy. Something about the neckline. However, the neckline is like eating her neck. I'm not trying to have that. So I might adjust that. But we talked about the steeking. We talked about how you can really cut out and trace the depth of armholes, the neck opening you need. So that's fine. I really like the sleeve, how it stops short and it's not terribly tapered. I wish we had more pictures of this example, but that's okay. I like this pattern down here. I love how big the all over pattern is. I don't think I like this pattern as much as the vest. I think the vest we just looked at is more balanced.
It is. This is a beautiful pattern. I really like how large that middle is, but there's still detail in it. And the bottom band repeating not until the top. I like that feature.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the scale of this. So looking through everything, looking through literally dozens of pages of patterns, looking through hundreds of options, this one stuck out to me. Again, it's not the exact palette I would go for, so I like it for the pattern. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. Let me know which ones really stand out to you. I'm looking for one pullover sweater, one sweater vest, and then we'll also get a third sweater quantity for something for Ned. And he hasn't really picked a pattern that he wants yet. There are garment samples in the shops in Scotland, so he might see a pattern he likes there in person. So I'm looking for a pullover. I'm looking for a vest. I don't know if Ned will want a pullover or a vest, but if you have ideas, if you have things you saw in this search or things you've seen in your own time knitting and searching through patterns, please let me know. You can send it to me through Ravelry. You can comment on the video here. You can send it on Instagram, and I would love, love, love your advice. All right, that was a workout. Not really, but that was exhausting. That's a lot of color, a lot of patterns to consider, and I'm really grateful for Megan's help. I'm really grateful for Peg and all of her suggestions, her color cards, all of the resources I have from these great mentors, these great colleagues. So I've got great resources here on my end, and I also have the greatest resource of this community, of all of you. So please, please, please let me know in the comments patterns that you liked, colors that stuck out to you, and any advice you have. And I'm excited to take you on this trip with me, and eventually I'm excited to start working on these projects and walk through that process here on the channel. As I mentioned throughout the video, you can find me on Instagram, on Ravelry. I'm here on YouTube on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and if you're interested, you can also find me over on Patreon. I have a really lovely group of supporters there who help fuel and fund the channel. They allow me to invest some time in making these videos and sharing part of what I do with you here on the internet. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of my community. It's wonderful to spend time with you, and I hope I hear from you in one of those ways. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.